Okay, so hi, I'm Joey Novick, and we're here for Blue Jersey. We're here with Assemblyman Carroll in his office, and to ask some questions. So I want to thank you for sitting with us today.
I wouldn't have missed the opportunity for the world.
There you go. So let's go right into the questions, because I think some of these are things that we've discussed before. Some of those are positions that sometimes we agree, I think sometimes, mostly we don't agree with. So first one right off the bat is a quote that you gave on slavery when New Jersey apologized, so to speak, for being involved in slavery, I guess, in the slave trade. What you said was, if I can read this without my glasses, if slavery was the prize for the modern... I'm sorry?
Price.
That's right. If slavery was the price for the modern Americans' ancestors had to pay in order to make one an American, when they should get down on one's knees every single day and thank the Lord for such a price was paid. And I'm just wondering, care to comment on that, because it seems to me in some way to be to show some lack of understanding of just the magnitude of the impact of slavery.
Well, you know, it's funny. I actually sat down and wrote that out, trying to make sure that no one could possibly misunderstand it.
And there I went ahead.
Well, you know, it's
right.
It's like anytime you discuss an issue that even remotely smacks of race, all of a sudden you've got a difficulty. You know, the point was basically is that it's looking back at the subject from the perspective of a modern American.
Right.
Let me frame the question somewhat differently. Would you rather be the ancestor of a free African or the ancestor of an American slave? And from my perspective, as an Irishman of Irish descent, such as it was, would I rather be laboring around in some misbegotten Irish potato field or an American? The point being, we can't go back and change history, and I think if you look at the books and such that I have, you'll know that I have a fair understanding of the Civil War, amongst other things.
Sure.
And you know, I reenact as a federal, and you know, the thought is that the value of being an American is just so inestimable that if the cost was high back when, not to suggest that you would have supported it at the time, but looking back in time, you should say, better that they paid that price and made me an American than that I were the African or Irish or European or whatever descendant.
Yeah, see, I guess the outrage of this, I guess you're no stranger. I mean, I like the way you speak your mind, which I appreciate very much.
Such as it is, yes.
But it just seems to me that the criteria by which you're measuring this, I mean, does it measure up? I mean, for example, does the same criteria apply to those who are American Indians? I mean, American Indians slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands, set aside on reservations, losing land. Does that same criteria, would you say the same thing for the American Indian in the same way?
Yes, to an extent, but remember, American Indians enjoy a special, and unfortunately special relationship with the United States. Had the Americans back when, the European settlers or whatever, incorporated them into the body politic as should have been done, as made them citizens and such. In fact, there was an interesting show about that the other day, about how Cochise and others out in, I guess, New Mexico and Arizona were misled into coming onto certain reservations, had broken promises and such like that. But you know, again, if I think, well, let's take it from the perspective of a member of the tribe, let's say the Seneca tribe, which now runs a couple of casinos. Right. Yeah, I think they're better off now than if they had been left alone to remain in a hunter-gathering existence or what have you. Sure. Yeah, it's not to suggest for a moment that Wounded Knee was a good idea, or that fighting, you know, exterminating an entire race of people is a good idea. But if you are now alive today in America and are an American citizen, probably you're better off now than you would have been if you'd been left alone. But or if your ancestors had been left alone.
Do you think, and this is the last question, I don't want to beat this up, I know you've said, you know, do you think that someone can draw the conclusion, who's listening to a statement like that, that in some way you may not grasp the magnitude of the impact of slavery, the impact of the annihilation of hundreds of thousands of Indians?
Well, I suppose I could quote Newt Gingrich at this point and say no. But, you know, it's, you know, the answer to the question is that whether it's looking at the Holocaust, I pride myself in being something of a historian. Sure. And I don't specialize in any particular area, but I suppose as a descendant of Irish immigrants back then forced out of Ireland by deliberate policies of starvation, You know, they came along with something of a gripe and a grudge, shall we say. Everyone, all of us. I mean, I don't know your ethnicity, but I will guarantee.
Jewish.
Well, okay, well then I would
We've
guarantee.
spoken about that. Sure.
Okay, well then my point is that I would suggest to you that perhaps you have a little bit of a history in your particular religious group of shall we say, not being particularly well liked in certain areas of the world.
No, I completely.
You know, so
Sure.
and all of us have that, and the point of the matter is that we should do better, I think, as a people and as a race, if we didn't walk around with historical chips on our shoulder. You know, we are here today, and our history is what it is. This more sensitive than thou stuff, you've got to be sensitive to this and sensitive to that, that really has very limited use. You know, most people, for example, I got in trouble for saying that no modern American has the right to be sensitive about slavery.
Right.
They don't. I mean, it doesn't affect anybody. The last slave died dozens, hundreds, and remember, it was only because, you know, America was a weird. So, do you ever see Rome, the movie?
Sure.
All sorts of slaves and that. Slavery was a normal condition around the world until relatively recently, and its American iteration only became racially tinged in the early part of the. I guess the middle part of the 18th century.
But as a student of history, you also have to. I'm sure you have an understanding that things occur linearly. There is wealth that has been built up in the South and in the United States because we got all this free labor.
Actually,
from
virtually
slaves.
all of that was eliminated in that little tiff that we had in 1863.
I know. I'm sure it was.
Remember, they converted most of that into Confederate currency, and that sort of had a problem in the market as of 1865.
But the land itself that's in the South certainly still has value because it was.
But they remembered again the policy. One of the problems with slavery was again you had a tendency to use land inappropriately when you had slaves. They grew tobacco a lot. So again, I'm not going to suggest, for example, the Capitol was built with slavery.
Sure.
That's fine. You know, yes. Do we owe a debt to the individuals who died 200 years ago? Yes. Okay. But again, today it's very difficult to trace back and say, hey, my dad was doing this, and don't we owe the same debt to the Irish immigrants who came in and built the Erie Canal, or the Chinese immigrants who came in and built the railroads, or what have you? Everybody's got their own history of oppression, and it just doesn't make a sense to carry that historical chip on your shoulder forever. It's long gone. It's as you say, it's history.
Sure.
Let's appreciate it as history and move on.
All right. Well, okay. Don't want to be a dead horse on that. Let me move on to something else that we've discussed periodically, which is kind of current as of the taping because it's set aside with the Local Mandates Council, the anti-bullying legislation. Your governor from your party signed it into law. I know that you voted to.
He's been known to make mistakes.
Right.
I'm sure you would admit that.
Yes, the pulling of your judgeship, another one, which I'm going to get to, but I know we spoke about. No, but, so, you know, here the anti-bullying legislation, you voted to oppose that law, and why?
Well, lots of reasons. First, amongst which was the fact it's an unfunded mandate. But again, if you read the legislation...
And did you know back then that
it
was
was
unfunded? Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, the fact that it defines bullying by reference to the identity of the victim rather than the actions it's taken, the bureaucratic nature of it, the fact that if you were looking at that bill, the one person who was not affected by that bill at all was the bully.
Right.
It made no sense at all. I mean, if you want to go back and say, draft a law that says, this constitutes bullying, here's how we're going to deal with it, that's fine. They didn't do that. Instead, they said, it's only bullying if I pick on you because you're Jewish. That's bullying. If I pick on you because it's Wednesday, it's not. And that's just silly. You know, we should treat it as, you were bullied when you were a kid, I'm sure. So was I.
Right.
It happens. Treat the offense. Say, if you're assaulted, that's bullying, and here's what we're going to do about it. It's not a tough call. It's not rocket science.
Which actually leads me to a second part of the question here, because the reason the law was even brought to the forefront by members of your party and members of the Democratic Party is because of the constant harassment and bullying of particular kinds of students in school, gays and lesbians. The death of Tyler Clemente brought that issue to the forefront.
Which, by the way, wasn't covered by the bill, but that's neither here
nor there. No, but the point, the point being that there are certain types of kids. Now, there's a difference. You'd have to admit that there's a difference if I pick on you because it's Wednesday or I pick on you because you're Irish, Jewish, or homosexual. There's a motivation there.
If someone punches me in the face, do I care what his reason is?
I guess when the fist lands on your face, no. But if I'm someone who's continually harassing and bullying the same kind of person, that's something
again,
that
concentrate on you as the bully. It doesn't.
Right.
Your victim is really of. I mean, I won't say he's of little concern, but from the perspective of the law, the fact that you're punching somebody in the nose, really, their motivation is kind of besides the point. I mean, we should concentrate on the fact that you've punched somebody in the nose, and go again. I don't think we should worry too much about the identity of the victim.
Well,
I mean, I'm just doing it. I was a little kid. I mean,
sure.
You may not look at it now, but when I was a kid, I was very small, and
sure.
of course, I attracted some attention from people who were not even all that much bigger than me, but I was also kind of, shall we say, a wuss, and so I attracted attention that way. Yeah, you know, I dealt with it with a left hook eventually, but that's obviously not a policy you
sure.
can write into the law. The point being that we should define the offense and punish the offender.
See, but wait a second. I mean, you have to agree that there. Do you think that there should? Maybe you don't agree. Do you think that there should be enhanced penalties for different types of crimes? I mean,
not,
you know,
no, not generally based upon status, because generally speaking, let's assume I punch you in the nose because you're Jewish, or I punch you in the nose because you're a banker, or I punch you in the nose because it's Wednesday. The offense is the same.
Well, that single offense, I can understand your point of view, but if we have a situation where there are people who are continually harassing, bullying, and punching, let's say, only Jews in the face or only blacks in the face, and they are looking at them as a target, shouldn't there be some increased penalty or in some way to dissuade them from doing that, other than just the penalty punching in the face?
The penalty for punching in the face should be sufficient to dissuade them, whatever the reason is.
Right. Okay.
And you know, and I understand where you're coming from, because
sure.
I mean, obviously, sometimes we do punish motivation, and
yeah, no, we do that all the time.
And it makes sense.
I mean, you're a lawyer. That's part of the law.
Don't please accuse me.
No,
no,
you sit on judiciary, so you're dealing with these issues
I understand
in
that,
committee.
I'm concerned about looking at somebody. Let's say, for example, you're marching down the street. But we did this with, for example, for certain status offenses.
Right.
Let's just assume I walk up and I rob you and I rob him at the same time.
Right.
But you're a merchant and he's a customer.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, we punish robbing the merchant more.
Right.
Why?
Because we protect. I think it would be because we protect the property.
Well, but his property has been I robbed him too.
Right.
Is he any the less a victim simply because he's a customer, not a merchant? If you, like I said, you go up to a hot dog stand, you rob the hot dog stand and the customers.
Mm-hmm.
Why should you treat the guy who owns the hot dog stand as different than the customers? It makes no sense.
So you're opposed to that?
I don't think we should do. We should concentrate on the crime itself, on the offense itself,
mm-hmm.
and. You know, if there are certain situations, like for example, if the victim is specifically vulnerable, if he's crippled or whatever, elderly and incapable of defending himself, yeah, sure, step it up that time. Because,
why?
Because that way you're preying on somebody who is more vulnerable. And you know, the idea is it's like going after a situation where you know, if you're going after somebody who is especially vulnerable. Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense.
See, but it's interesting you say that, because you have voted to oppose age-based enhancements for example, the Consumer Fraud Act. The Consumer Fraud Act has enhanced penalties to protect those who are seniors, who you would necessarily define as being more vulnerable, but you voted against that.
Well, it's because, you see, the fact of the matter is age in and of itself should not be a grounds for that. I probably misspoke in that way. I'm using age as a special vulnerability, for example, in physical offenses, what have you. You can take that into account. But if you're, let's say, for example, if you go after Warren Buffett, who happens to be 70, he's pretty sharp when it comes to the intellect.
Sure.
And therefore, I don't think that the consumer fraud law should necessarily apply with heavier penalties to someone just simply because they happen to be over the age of 65.
And see, this is funny, because this is one of the differences that I've observed between, I guess, the Democrats and Republicans and maybe liberals and conservatives. It would seem to me that we can't make laws to protect specific people. That's true. We can't make a law that just protects Warren Buffett, but we can make a law that has an enhanced penalty for someone who would prey upon those who are seniors, to protect them as a class.
But I don't look at the nature of, class is always a problem, because
sure.
Because anytime you group somebody together, inevitably there are going to be some people in there who fit the definition of someone who's vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And some who do not. And therefore, let's take, for example, the classic example. You are sitting right now within 1,000 feet of a school zone.
Right.
That is a dumb law.
Yep.
I mean, to punish somebody in excess, because let's assume, you sold me a kilo of cocaine right now, and there's a school right across the street. It has nothing to do with the school.
Right.
So we went after the distance rather than the fact that it had something to do with the school.
Sure.
If you want to punish people, especially for targeting children, special vulnerability, fine. But to punish you because you're sitting in the wrong area, or you did it which had nothing whatsoever to do with the actual reason for the law itself, it's just silly. So again, at the end of the day, I think the law should be concentrated on the act itself and not the nature of the victim, for the most part. Now again, if you have a specific,
sure.
If you pick on somebody who's particularly vulnerable, I can see it.
You know, one of the things I find interesting when I speak with people like Mike Proto, Rick Shafton, Steve Lonigan, and yourself, is the idea that any protection of somebody based on class always seems to fall back onto what Martin Luther King said, is that we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, which, when he was saying it, talked about doing things like making sure that people have the right to vote, making sure that people can get jobs. Here, what we're talking about is actually protecting people from harm based on somebody's preying on somebody who's black or gay or lesbian.
Is it worse to prey on someone because they're gay and steal their wife because they're gay than it is to prey on them because they're walking down the street?
If it's being done on a regular basis and people are being targeted, which is what happens quite often in gay and lesbian communities or in the black community, I would say yes. I would say that is the case.
I might agree with you in certain circumstances because you see, a straight philosophical libertarian doctrine has very little use for civil rights laws generally.
Sure.
Because generally speaking, we feel that you have the private right to be a jackass if you want to be.
If you want to be, absolutely.
The problem is if everybody in the community is that way, like as it was down in the South.
Right.
I think there's times when you have to deviate from strict libertarian doctrine and say the civil rights laws back then, let's take the voting rights law, made sense because everybody, I mean, it was a uniform, it was a widespread problem, and you really had to address it.
I mean, recently your governor...
But I will say this,
sure.
You look now at the voting rights law and you say, hold on a minute here, why is it applied to Jersey City? Is there a real substantive rationale for protecting Albio Series?
Mm-hmm.
Do we really have to look and say that the people in Newark are facing regular discrimination at the polls on the basis of their race?
Yeah, I'm a historian. I follow history myself, and I would say that there are laws that are put into place that after a certain period of time have done their job and have set the course correction in the right direction. Do I necessarily think that we should change the law? I mean, for example, if we have a law that says you can only go 65 and everyone is going 65, do we now say, well, I guess we don't need that law anymore because everyone seems to be going 65, statistically we don't need it anymore? Of course not. I think that the law needs to be in place to continue to make sure.
Perhaps just the remedies then. Say instead of a pre-clearance provision or special solicitousness for particular peoples of a particular race or ethnicity or what have you, just simply say, thou shalt not discriminate, but we're not going to assume it.
Right. Well, let me go back to the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act. Rand Paul, way back when, made a comment, something along the lines that he would have not voted for civil rights legislation. Congressman Michael Patrick Carroll is sitting in Congress in 1965. You're a 35-years old. You've been a congressman for 4 or 5 years. Do you vote for the Civil Rights Act?
It's a counterfactual hypothetical.
I know, but what can I say?
Again, philosophically, I would have a problem with it.
Right.
Because I don't believe that we should create these windows of opportunity for special group statuses, and I'm highly suspicious of any kind of groups. Then again, as I say, at that particular point in time, it might have been necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is interesting that the conservatives of the time, in both parties, people like Bob Dole, Al Gore Sr., all voted against civil rights legislation.
And again, because of the concern they had for federal power, which has been borne out. The fact of the matter is,
interesting.
You look at a lot of the stuff, a lot of the predictions about. I mean, look what's going on down in Texas right now.
Sure.
Where you have, or even, for example, I'm not, though it's technically speaking a civil rights law, but the feds just proposed a rule that apparently will impose disparate impact tests on mortgage lending decisions. Now, that makes absolutely no sense at all. I mean, if you have a situation where a credit rating will disproportionately impact, say, Hispanics, so what? I mean, it's not a racially or ethnically discriminatory undertaking. It's presumably got some relevance to do with whether you're going to be able to pay it back.
Let me change the subject to something that we're going to have to deal with on Thursday. I will be there on Thursday.
I was expecting this to be first.
No. I know, but we're sort of meandering. I like the way this is going. I think this is fine. Thursday, you will be sitting on the Judiciary Committee in the Assembly, and they will bring up the marriage equality bill, which was passed. I know you don't like the term, but
marriage is already equal.
I know anyone can get married unless you're gay or lesbian.
No, you can still get married. Jim Green is a prime example of that.
But you can't get married to somebody who you want to spend your life with and love. So here you are. You're opposed to marriage equality, or I guess your term you would say gay marriage. Now, why are you opposed to this? I mean, what is the reason for getting the government out of the marriage business completely?
Well, now, if we did that would be an interesting question. I mean, that actually, Christy Whitman actually came across with something along those lines, which was the one that Bruce Harris quoted in his letter, where she basically said, let's get the government out of this, and then, which would be an interesting undertaking, because we could say then, based upon libertarian doctrine, to the extent that we choose to subsidize child rearing, which is what marriage is basically all about, Let's do it. Arguable, but I mean, my thought of the matter is anytime you want to change the law or change a tradition, you have the obligation of coming forth and giving me a good reason. And let's go back to the state of nature. The two of us are in a state, and I'm the lawgiver of the society, and I ask you, or you come up to me and say, we're going to discuss today what relationships society is going to bless.
Right.
And you say, well, we should bless same-sex relationships, and I say to you, why? Now, we don't have marriage today, so you can't go back on that equally.
My aunt Bella would say, why not? You know,
because there's no purpose for society that's served by recognizing those particular relationships.
Here we are. Look, we're not living in the back then. We're not living in a jungle. We're not living.
No, you asked me a counterfactual hypothetical in
No,
1965 on the title.
That further. Okay, granted, good enough. But here's the question: we have a large percentage of the population who are in gay and lesbian relationships, long-term gay and lesbian relationships. The Supreme Court, whether you like it or not, has ruled a few years back that they are deserving of the state of New Jersey treating them in the same way as
the court wants to oppose it. Then the court has the right, I suppose, has the raw judicial power to oppose it. But I just don't think it serves a public purpose. And
so the legislature is now required to resolve that issue because,
with all due respect to the court,
right,
you don't have the right to require us to do anything. If you want to impose a remedy, feel free. No one tells a legislator how to vote except his constituents.
See, it's interesting because I agreed with Deborah Porras' dissent, which basically said that they should have just created a civil marriage.
Her dissent was basically that the decision wasn't stupid enough.
Well, and, but so you're opposed to marriage equality or gay marriage because
I don't see the point.
You don't see the point in it.
I mean,
so
it turns, marriage is not about me and my wife. It's about me and my wife as potential parents.
Right.
Traditionally, and you've heard, in the words of the immortal sage, what's love got to do with it?
Right.
For 10,000 years or whatever, love didn't enter into it at all. Now, you can tell me, and it's a good argument, that things have progressed further now,
sure,
that we're going to do. But it comes back to the question. Let's take, again, I know nothing about Mr. Harris except that he's in a 32-year long committed relationship.
Right.
Let's assume it stops tomorrow.
Right.
How is society harmed?
I don't think society is harmed when his relationship terminates.
It is now
of his own choosing.
Exactly, that's my point. So since marriage is a three-party contract, wife, husband, or spouse, and society. If society has no interest in that relationship, why should we bless it?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, because it's a matter of equality. It's a matter of simple equality, that I should be able to be as happy in my relationship with my spouse, be he or she, number one.
If you have 5 spouses, that should be applied the same way?
Well, you see, number is different than a simple one-on-one relationship. Because it simply is on the face. I mean, no one
The point of marriage was the
articulating
human pair bond, the complementary husband, wife, mother, father. That was the original purpose.
But using that reasoning, my brother, who is 61, should not be permitted to marry his fiancée who's 61.
You're a lawyer now, John Ross?
Yes, I am.
Remember the fertile octogenarian questions back in law school?
Yes, if there is a fertile octogenarian question.
So the whole point was that with the marriage, and again, remember, when this all evolved, people didn't live that long.
Right.
So the idea was that you had a one man, one woman, one time type deal, which by the way is not such a bad idea. Is playing around with let's take for example Newt Gingrich. I mean, to use a perhaps bad example of a serial, what they call it, serial
marrier.
And a serial monogamous. And maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. I don't like the idea that we've made divorce that easy to get, or maybe we shouldn't have made marriage that easy to get. There's a lot of philosophical questions that have to be answered. But when on Thursday I'm going to go there, I'm going to listen to what they have to say. And I voted against this once before on the grounds that it just doesn't seem to me to advance any societal purpose. We don't have, again, you're free to enter into whatever relationship you want. God bless, have a good time. Whether it's with a man or woman, or 2 men or 12 women, it doesn't really matter to me.
See, people on your side of the aisle continue to apply the criteria of number as if it has anything to do with a one-on-one relationship.
Why is 2 special?
2 is the traditional relationship.
But you just told us tradition doesn't make any difference anymore.
No. I didn't say tradition doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference to me is love. What makes a difference to me is a committed relationship.
But you see, that's not what makes a difference to society. Society does not care about love. That's not a question they ask you on the marriage license.
Right.
And the fact is that they're only interested in your potential for reproduction. Again, could we go back and change that around? Sure.
I'm sure we can. And it's interesting because, again, your party's governor supports civil unions that may get him in trouble in years to come, but he basically, when asked about marriage equality, his default answer always has been, look, we have civil unions in New Jersey that does the job, that's what the Supreme Court wanted, so I will veto any marriage equality bill that comes to my desk.
I think personally it should be like just, everybody had their gay uncle, I had mine. I don't think he ever would have considered the idea of a marriage. You know, it wasn't his thing. I think
sure.
For all I know, he was a Republican. But you know, the point was is that just being left alone seems to me to be sufficient. We as a society, again, and you go back and you look at the reasons why a lot of the benefits apply to marriage today.
Right.
One could argue that it's sort of an outdated philosophy, in that, for example, pension benefits apply only to marital couples.
Right.
Because they assumed that wife was going to stay home with the kids and raise them and sacrifice. There's a lot to be said for that particular philosophy today. Women, despite the fact that we are equal, don't tell me that mothers don't spend a lot more time with the kids and have a lot more investment than fathers do, even in the best of circumstances. So there's still something to be said for that. But one could argue that given the new status of women and the new status of relationships, shall we say, that there's no reason to apply those traditional philosophies of benefits. And perhaps a lot of them would go away then. If
Defense of Marriage Act, a perfect example of overreaching by the federal government in an area where they were never involved in before.
Yeah,
as a conservative libertarian, I would think that you would be opposed to that.
Again, well, I'm not wild about federal involvement and that sort of stuff, but then again, there are all sorts of federal statutes which rely upon marital social security being primary amongst them.
Sure.
And you know, again, let's go back to the classic little case that we had down at Ocean County, where you had a 59-year-old lesbian prosecutor's investigator and her 29-year-old lover. Now, okay, what did the 29-year-old lover do for society such that now, for the next 50 years, she's going to be drawing a pension? Yeah. And you know, now come back to let's come back to the freeloaders here for a minute.
What she did for society was fall in love with someone and create a relationship with that person.
And society cares about
that. And based on your theory that it should be based on childbearing, she has the opportunity to bear children the same way any other woman who
not
would.
With her partner.
Yeah, no, but she could bear children the same way
but again,
any other woman would.
With respect to a marital couple, there's a presumption that that will happen.
Right.
It's not always right, but it's a presumption. And I'll be the first to admit, people who don't, won't, or can't have kids are somewhat of a free rider on the system. Because again, it was designed for the purposes of marriage.
Let's get rid of those.
Well, you know, you put as a bill and we'll talk about it.
Okay. There are a few issues that the Democratic Party, the ACLU, and Michael Patrick Carroll agree on, one of which is medical marijuana. And I know that this is something that you have supported, and I was wondering if you could tell me why and how you feel about the governor seeming to drag his feet on this issue.
I can't speak to that last part.
Sure.
I mean, I'm philosophically involved with it, but I leave the details up to Reed and to Senator Scutari and the others who've been much more involved in it. There's no evil plans, you know. It's to my way of thinking, if a doctor says to you, you're going to benefit from this particular thing, why should the government stand between it? Between you and the doctor. If it makes you feel good, great. I mean, we face a situation where the guy right now, I think it's a multiple sclerosis patient, is being chucked in jail for having, what, 17 plants or something along those lines. Why? I mean, what possible harm did he present to society? And, you know, I mean, you've done the history on it. You know that the entire illegalization of marijuana has a very checkered and perhaps racially tinged history. And I look at it, I think someday, soon, hopefully, the government or the people are going to have a calm, sober, dispassionate, logical discussion about whether the costs of a prohibitionary society are worth the alleged benefits. I mean, we had one of my colleagues in the Republican side, when we were discussing this issue, said it might make that if we do medical marijuana, it'll make it more available. I said, how? How could it be any more available than it is today? If I want it right now, just you and I, we could probably walk a mile away, and the two of us...
Not within 1,000 feet of the school.
Probably, well, I don't know, probably
right.
could. But two middle-aged, pasty-faced looking guys who probably look like they're cop plants anyway could probably find it in half an hour.
White socks, right?
And the whole... White socks.
Yep.
You know, it's no doubt in my mind at all. You know, so it's just not possible to me to believe that it would make it any more available.
So should we extend that same criteria to all drugs that are, or...
I'm inclined to believe that we'd have to have that discussion. Because again, at the end of the day, if someone really, truly wants to go to hell and wants to take this, there's a limit to how far government should go to prevent them from doing that.
Okay.
And you know, to my way of thinking, I look at the massive harm that is caused. Look at the costs of incarceration. Look at the, I mean, how many lawyers do we employ down there throwing people in jail for drug offenses? Look at the huge amounts of money available to organized crime as a result of keeping these substances illegal. And it clearly hasn't worked.
Interesting.
To lower the demand much. I mean, because, I mean, look at what's going on in Mexico. Huge wars.
So are you afraid what's been happening in California with this is going to happen in New Jersey? I mean, in California, you can walk into the store across the street. There's a doctor who has an office here. You walk next door with your prescription that you've just gotten from this guy who just graduated from medical school, and you can get your...
I'll leave the details of that up to the powers that be. You know, again, I think that's
Sure.
part of what Chris is worried about, is the easy availability of it. You know, you and I, as we sit here taping this, are about 250 feet away from a store where you can walk in and get liquor. So I'm...
He's counted the steps. So
Absolutely. I'm an Irishman, for crying out loud. It's a, you know, so my thought on the matter is that and again, what you have to understand from me is purely philosophical. You're looking at perhaps this, as you might have gathered, the straightest arrow that you've ever met.
No,
I have never
also...
smoked a joint,
Right.
never popped a pill, never done a line, never. Not even once, nor do I even drink that much, maybe occasionally beer. It's purely philosophical for me. And you know, I might go out for a Sam Adams now and again, but that's about it.
Right.
So it's purely philosophical for me. And I look at it from the perspective of, do we really want to expend the kind of resources we're expending trying to prevent something that people really want to do, who are willing to break the law to do it, and provide these huge opportunities for organized crime at tremendous cost, and number of lives lost is just, the number of lives lost to, say, for example, heroin abuse,
Right.
pales to insignificance to the number of people killed in the trade.
Do we decriminalize marijuana completely to make it
I think
a parking ticket? Or do
well, we're trying to do something, as you probably know. Reed and I have a bill in right now for 15 grams or fewer,
Right.
or less, I guess. I don't know. And I got some arguments that said they want to bump it up to about 30.
Right.
Yeah, my thought of the problem is again, I think we probably have better things to do with the $70,000 or $80,000 a year we're paying each one of our police officers than to have them police this particular
All right.
thing.
Well, okay. Let me go on to another question. I think I appreciate that. I've beaten that. Philosopher once said, I found this quote online, there should be radical solutions for radical problems and conservative solutions for conservative problems. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you think the left has done that has any value in people's lives whatsoever.
Define the left.
Well,
because remember, I'd be defined.
Democratic Party.
Well, Democratic Party included Lester Maddox.
ACLU, well, current Democratic Party, ACLU.
Well, the ACLU defended, you know,
sure.
let's talk about Skokie or free speech or what have you.
Right.
Why? I was one of the few people to vote against a bill that we did not long ago on adult entertainment enterprises. I mean,
Right. Well,
they wanted to have them 1,000 feet away from parks and schools, and that just, again, that struck me as stupid. So if the left was on board with actually they weren't. I think Valerie Huddle was the sponsor of that legislation.
Sure.
But you know, it's free speech philosophy. The left sometimes has a tendency to be much more less inclined to impose. Well, I mean, let's just take for example something like homosexuality used to be illegal.
Right.
Dumb. You know, to the extent that the ACLU or the left was involved in getting the government quite literally out of the business of regulating sexual conduct, great. Sure. And again, my dad was a newspaper reporter, and of course.
Oh yes, I know, of course.
Of course, being a New York Times reporter, he was pretty much of a leftist. What else would he be, you know? So
and then you're a good rebellious son.
That's what they say. My father figures that
Right.
a conservative Republican came out of his youthful rebellion. You know?
So we need more conservative Republicans. Question
To the
is,
extent that the left does not trust governmental power, and I'll give you an example.
Sure.
When we did the Patriot Act here in New Jersey, the two people that were doing the biggest bellyaching were Neil Cohen and Mike Carroll.
Right.
But we were concerned, both of us were concerned about the overreach of government.
Right.
And so to the extent that the left is distrustful, say for example, of police conduct, great.
City of Camden gets about 80% of its annual budget from the state. About 50% of the property in the city does not contribute to any ratables. Crime is increasing, jobs are scarce. What should be done? Should the government get out of there completely, or what do we do?
You know, it's like the Detroit syndrome. You really don't know. I mean, you know, you're looking when something has gone that far. And you know, I used to joke, and you wouldn't like the joke, that the New Jersey could have served as a good urban renewal project by simply turning its guns to the city and opening fire and flattening whatever was there, because that is just such a disaster. And you know, I pity poor Dana Red. I mean, she's a nice lady,
Sure.
but I really, honestly, my thought would be something, go to urban homesteading, let people go in there and buy the properties for $1 or whatever. you got to get people into those areas, and that this may be one of the things. Let's say, for example, we took the money that we're now spending throwing marijuana dealers in jail and used it to throw in criminals like the murderers and stuff who are making Camden unlivable. This may be one of the areas where the state really has to. I think they're talking about it already with state police. Law and order is absolutely necessary. I mean, if you've got an area where there is eventually a no man's land, a killing field, you got to do something like that.
So you would be in favor of the state continuing to
I don't know about the
participate?
aid. Again, I don't know that the aid per se, because the problem we have when we give monies to cities is it tends to disappear. And it tends not to go to cops and firefighters and services like that.
So greater oversight by the state?
I'm not even sure that the greater oversight. I think maybe just actually doing it. I mean, for example, let's look at how did the state takeover of Newark schools work out for us? It really didn't go all that well. So I'm not persuaded that sending money, or let's say School Construction Corporation, again, where did the money go? No one actually knows. When we did the work with Human Services, Joe Crine was doing Human Services Committee, we spent also some money on Child Services. The money left, no one has a clue where it went. And so to keep shoveling money into the municipal offices in Camden probably isn't a good idea.
So then, I mean, would you be in favor of greater government oversight?
Well, let's say, for example, do something you wouldn't like. How about we go to a school voucher program for every kid in Camden? If you live in Camden, physically live in Camden, you get a school voucher. I guarantee you have a housing shortage tomorrow, because people. That would be the mother of all urban enterprise zones. People would want to move into the city. You need cities are great places, and you need people to move into them, and therefore they have to be orderly. And so when you have a situation where things have just gotten so far out of hand, something's got to be done. I would be lying to you if I told you I was a sufficient expert on Camden to know the actual what I would do if given the opportunity.
And the reason why this is a good question for someone like yourself is this is a this is a problem that's gone so far in one direction that it is like Detroit. It's become, I mean, here it is across the river from one of the greatest cities in the world, Philadelphia. I mean, Philadelphia.
I hate the Flyers.
Well, no, I'm sorry to mention, except for the sports teams, the greatest city in the world, one of the greatest cities in the world, and here you have all these problems.
Part of it is remember, they fought against things like the cement plant down there. They called it environmental racism.
Right.
They weren't particularly supportive of Campbell's. There were a lot of places down there where they really could have done a better job of getting ratables and such into the city, and they were...
No, it's interesting, and this last question you mentioned about environmental racism. There are statistics where you can fly over New Jersey and you could see centers where there were greater incidents of cancer, water pollution, where there are poor people, where there are people of color who were living.
Tom's River?
I mean, well, of course there's one example that doesn't hold true, but where they tend to put things like that.
I think it's the other way around. I mean, a lot of those places were there, and then poor people moved in. It's like the railroad. New Jersey's a beautiful state. Yeah. You'd never know it by riding Amtrak.
Right.
But it wasn't because they put the railroad in the poor areas. It was because the poor areas moved to the railroad. And so again, when you look at the cities and such like that, I think you'll find that people moved there and were poor, and that's where the facilities tended to be. I mean, they didn't put, what was it, the one in Newark was cadmium? Was that the one they had? Yeah. That was there for 100 years.
So what do you think? Poor people are attracted to places?
They were attracted to jobs, and
the jobs.
So and at the time, it's
I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but I would have to go back and take a look at what came first, because I
would venture a guess that remember cities grew up and people would move into them, and poor people would be, and again, when you're poor, you go to housing which is available to you and is affordable to you. I mean, look at the stories out in New York with Hell's Kitchen. I mean, that was there a long time before the Irish arrived on the scene, but when they finally got there, and then after that, I think the Jews came in after that for Eastern Europe, and so again, that was just the way people moved into. It wasn't It wasn't designed to poison poor people, and at the time, of course, they didn't even know about those things.
Well, I'm going to look up those statistics. I guess you want to wrap it up.